Hi folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is session number 357. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Okay, great to have you with me once again. Here we are. Now, I have two daughters, Ellie, who is at university in her second year, and Kate, who is first year A-levels, and she's just 6 weeks away from learning to drive, which is a little bit terrifying. So I know a thing or two about being the bank of mum and dad, and really, I'm only just getting started. So today we're going to talk a bit more about that. After the main body of the show, as usual, I'll look at a review that's been left not actually this past week. I'm quite behind on reading out reviews, but never mind. But after that, I'll talk about what we're going to be discussing next week. But before all of that, remember, as always, this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my friends at Seven Investment Management. They've been helping me out here on Meaningful Money for ages, which is brill, and I'm very grateful to them for doing so. So please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. And don't forget the new Meaningful Money branded self-investment platform by 7im. Head over to meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest for more information on that. Okay, so today my guest is Mark Bogard. He's the CEO of Family Building Society. And the people at FBS reached out to me because of some research that they've been doing into the cost of supporting children, particularly once those children become adults, and what the implications of this is for the parents. Quite a bit more as well. It's an interesting conversation, actually. I hope that you enjoy it. As ever, remember, notes and links from today's show, they're at the show notes, which is the only link you need to remember, meaningfulmoney.tv/session357, meaningfulmoney.tv/session357. Here's my interview with Mark Bogard. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Mark Bogard, who is Chief Executive of Family Building Society. Mark, welcome to Meaningful Money. How are you doing today?
Fine, thank you very much.
Good. I wonder if you can just start by giving us something of your backstory. I think it's important for people to know who's speaking, who you are, what you spend your days doing now, and a little bit about how you got to this point, please.
So I've been the Chief Executive of Family Building Society for about 7 years now. Before that, I've done various other jobs in financial services for various banks and other sorts of financial advisory firms. I have to say, though, that working for a mutual building society has been the most interesting and the most fun.
I can imagine very different sort of dynamic, I guess, from the classic sort of shareholder, CEO, board type of arrangement.
Yeah, so not having any shareholders really changes everything, and it allows you to think much longer term. You don't have to keep the shareholders happy. All you have to do is keep the customers and the staff happy. So it is genuinely a very, very different dynamic to being in a company led by the shareholders, where every 6 months you've got to go and see your shareholders, explain what your earnings per share has been and what the dividend's going to be. And really, that's all they're interested in. So it's much, much more different than I thought it was going to be. And people's reaction to what you do is very different as well. So it is genuinely a different ethos and a different sort of organisation. And that diversity in financial services can only be a good thing.
I absolutely agree. Now, Family Building Society have commissioned this study into what we all kind of know as the bank of mum and dad. I wonder what the trigger was for that. What was the sort of thinking behind it?
So when I took over the building society here, it wasn't called the Family Building Society. It was called National Counties Building Society, and it had started originally in 1896 as the Post Office Building Society. It was set up by postmen for postmen, and it was effectively the first direct financial services company that we could find in the world. So without having any branches, and the reason for that was because the postman used to post in their savings or post in their mortgage application. And then sometime in the 60s or 70s, when British Telecom was demerged from the post office and various other things, the society wasn't allowed to be called the Post Office Building Society anymore. So it changed its name to National Counties, I think, because some people wanted it to be national, some people wanted it to be called local. And that name didn't really mean anything to anybody. Most building societies are local to a place, Coventry, Leeds, Yorkshire. Or they do a segment or sector. So there's the Teachers Building Society, which helps teachers. There's the Ecology Building Society, which helps people build eco-friendly homes. And we could have really gone out and been anything we wanted to be. And in talking to people, this intergenerational finance thing seemed to resonate very strongly with people, and families across the generations having to make the most of their money these days. And the way people live now is very different from the way it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. So grandparents and parents helping children, families trying to make the most of their money across generations, it just resonated with people. And that's really how the idea of the Family Building Society came about. And we launched five or so years ago, effectively to help people be the bank of mum and dad. And I think the bank of mum and dad is the sixth biggest bank in Britain now.
Wow. That's quite a number. I was going to ask, particularly when it comes to first-time buyers, obviously it is more difficult than ever for younger folks to get onto the housing ladder. I wondered if there are some figures on that, just how many more people are being helped by mum and dad to get on the housing ladder than, say, 10 or however many years ago.
Well, it was absolutely fascinating. When we went out and did focus groups with kids, we discovered two things very quickly. The first thing is we started talking to kids who were between 20 and 25 about getting on the housing ladder. And they still had a very strong desire to get on the housing ladder. I thought that people wouldn't really want to do that anymore. They'd want to travel and do other things. But actually, the vast majority of people still want to own their own home. The problem was we were talking to the wrong age group, because it has become unrealistic for people between 20 and 25 generally to seek to buy their own home. So we then ended up talking to people between 25 and 30. And we came across virtually nobody who had succeeded in buying their own home, or who mostly had friends who had managed to buy their own home, who had not done it without some help. And that was very different. So when I bought my first home, my father nagged me to buy a home because it was the best thing I could ever do. I got a 100% mortgage from Barclays.
Yeah.
I didn't need a deposit. They gave me a 100% mortgage and I was off. Nowadays, that is not feasible, particularly since the crash. And all of these people between 25 and 30 needed help from their parents, needed an inheritance, needed to do it with friends or siblings. And often they needed multiple ways in which to help to get on the housing ladder. But they'd still make an enormous stretch to do it. But very, very few of them do it on their own. And you can see that the government's got this Help to Buy scheme, and it has helped hundreds of thousands of people, because doing it on your own, given the imbalance between supply and demand in the housing market, is really hard.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and that's quite. So 100% of 25 to 30-year-olds hadn't been able to do it, or didn't know anybody who'd done it without the help of mum and dad. So, but this has implications. Clearly, there implications for the parents helping out, and potentially implications for the recipients of that help as well. So having read the output, the results essentially of the study that you've commissioned, and the two really helpful documents actually about both the legal and the financial implications, I thought it'd be good for us just to go over some of the main points there. But the thing that I think came across really clearly to me is that there's a lot more to it than you might immediately think. So let's just look at the financial implications first, if we can. So really there's four main ways that people, the parents can help, or grandparents, of course, can help their children buy a house. So the first is gifting, of course, just giving the money outright. So what might the implications be of that, Mark?
So it is, as you point out, it is quite often grandparents as well as parents. The we found a real reluctance amongst people to give money away. And the principal reason for that is the parents or grandparents don't know how long they're going to live. So they don't know whether they're going to have to keep paying for themselves until they're 70, 80, 90 or 100. And they all know once you give money to a child or grandchild, you ain't never going to get it back. So the biggest concern that the parents and grandparents had about giving money was effectively losing control over that money. And that's a big issue for people. And the other issue is then equality potentially and fairness amongst the children. So if you've got, 2, 3, 4 children, giving a reasonable amount of money away for a deposit on a home or whatever, doing that 2, 3, 4 times against a background of maybe having to live till you're 90 or 95, people found that very tough. The other issue then is inheritance tax. A gift will come outside of your estate provided you survive for 7 years. But documenting these things, the date when it happens and all of those things are also very important. And you see very little of that in families. Families find it really hard to talk about this stuff. They find it really hard to write it down. And the most important thing that we found is actually to talk about what you're going to do and then write it down, because we've come across cases where the taxman, if you don't evidence these things, then the taxman may take a different view to what you think has happened.
Very much so. I mean, the whole writing it down thing, I imagine, is particularly important. It's important across the board, but I imagine it's particularly important when we're talking about loaning money. Am I right?
Yeah, so, I mean, just to give you one example. So I mentioned before, my father nagged me to buy a property. I bought my first flat in 1988. I got a 100% mortgage from Barclays. It was just before the crash. So 18 months later, my mortgage had gone from 7.25% to 15.25%. Nice. And the value of the property I'd bought with a 100% mortgage had gone down about 20%. Now, that was all unpleasant. It was particularly unpleasant because my mortgage was now more than my take-home pay.
Wow.
So I had a conversation with my father, and he thought about it for a bit, and he clearly decided that he had played a role in getting me in this mess. So he decided to give me some money each month, which was effectively what I needed to eat. And that went on for about 18 months until interest rates came back down again. And in the early part of your career at work, you get promoted, so you get paid a bit more. So 18 months later, mortgage came down, I was being paid a bit more, and he stopped giving me any money. And I thought that was that. About 2 years later at a family dinner, he leant across to me and said, Mark, when am I going to get that money back? The money that I thought he had given me to help me get out of the mess that he'd helped get me into, he saw as a loan. And that was a difficult moment. Now, he didn't really need the money, but he was making the point that, this was that, in messes, you have to find ways out of it, and then you have to make it good. And it's interesting. So about half the money that we see parents help children with is a loan, and about half of those parents want to charge interest on that loan. And that is often to make the point rather than because they want the money. But writing that down is a good thing, particularly if the children end up living with other people or they're buying together. Writing it down then is absolutely critical. And that is the single biggest thing that parents worry about for their children. We call it the hairy biker syndrome. And that was because in one focus group very early on, there was a chap there who'd been in property and made a reasonable amount of money. He had £50,000 to give his daughter as a deposit, but she was going out with a gentleman who he described as a hairy biker, and they didn't like him. And what they didn't want was the hairy biker to move in with the daughter and acquire an interest in the property and a share of the deposit money that they'd given the daughter. And in property law, that happens quite easily and quite quickly. And as a biker myself, not all bikers are bad, but this fundamental point about who you're child ends up living with and the nature of that relationship and the contribution of that person to the ownership of a property, that is absolutely vital to write down. Because in acrimonious breakups, you see some really horrible disputes about the interest of that third party in the property, and parents are very worried about that.
I can imagine. So is there something that realistically that parents can do? There's some kind of an agreement. It's not a prenuptial, but gosh, I can't even say it. Prenuptial agreement is because we're not talking marriage here, but there's a sort of similar kind of agreement, isn't there? Sort of a pre-cohabitation type agreement. Is that sort of legally binding or what?
Yes, you can just write these things down, and you can effectively agree whatever you want to agree. But taking legal advice, and it's difficult because it's not very romantic. But when it goes wrong, it's just really horrible. And the point is, if a parent gifts a deposit, if a parent is helping with mortgage payments, if the third party is living there, is contributing even just a bit to the bills and the upkeep of the property, they acquire an interest in that property. And in acrimonious breakups, having written down beforehand, for example, that you're not going to acquire any interest in the property and you're living there rent-free and that's enough, you can write down whatever you want. And that is effectively binding. So we would always encourage people to do that. Now, look, sometimes people will live together and they'll pay half the mortgage each, but that you need to write down as well. So the way in which people are living in a property or own a property together is really, really important.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's like a little mini divorce.
Yeah, and with all the implications of that, and obviously, cohabitation is increasingly the norm. So I guess the law and people's understanding of what might happen in that situation is going to sort of catch up with that. One of the options, of course, we've talked about sort of gifting money. We've talked about parents loaning money, but parents can also act as guarantor on a mortgage. But there's clear implications of that, are there not?
Yeah. So one of the ways which is popular because it doesn't involve cash is for parents effectively to use the equity in their home as security or a guarantee on the child's mortgage or grandchild's mortgage. And there are two ways in which that operates. If you guarantee a debt, then you are liable for the whole of that debt. If you provide security for a certain amount, then you're liable only to that amount. And there's a big difference between the two. And there are different products out there which operate in a different way. So the way we do it is for the parent to provide security for a fixed amount. And the parent can use their home or cash to do that. They often use their home because it's effectively costing them nothing. And I think they have in their minds that if they're on the hook for £20,000, £30,000 and the worst came to the worst, because the value of the property declined and the child couldn't pay the mortgage anymore, then they could meet that obligation. If you're on the hook for the whole amount, then that's a much harder and more unpleasant thing to do. One of the things that was fascinating amongst these 25 to 30-year-olds that we uncovered, and I think it was different from my generation, was there was an incredibly high degree of financial responsibility amongst the children. So the children knew that they needed help from their parents, but the one thing they didn't want to do is for their parents in providing that help to mess up their own finances. And that was particularly true of kids who had been brought up by single parents. So the children of single parent mothers still knew that they'd have to get their mother to help them, but the last thing they wanted to do was mess up their parents' finances. And so it was interesting, but people between 25 and 30 had a high expectation of being made redundant at some point, say on a 5-year time horizon, because people often take out a 5-year fixed mortgage. So if you ask them to think about 5 years, they think that someone like me is going to come along and make them redundant. Now, interestingly, they had a high degree of confidence they'd find another job. And, we've got record levels of employment in the UK at the moment. So that confidence is probably right. But they knew there'd be a sort of 3 to 6 month period there which may be uncomfortable for them, where they, you know, between losing their previous job. And so covering that period was really important to people. In the product we do, we effectively give people free insurance to cover being made redundant. But that is really important to people. And we hadn't thought of that, because it was, you know, when my father helped me, you know, I thought he was helping me. I you know, and it may be a bad thing, I wasn't thinking about his finances. But that's definitely, I think that's one of the things that has changed across the generations, which was encouraging, and you know, it was just nice.
Yeah, it's. I agree. I was going to use exactly the same word, encouraging. I did a whole season of this podcast a few months ago, aimed particularly at the millennial generation, and in researching for that, certainly more than I thought would be the case, there is a clear feeling of responsibility and much better literacy than I thought, actually, or at least it certainly is better. It's a long way to go, because we still don't teach this stuff effectively in school or college or at university, I don't think. But there certainly seemed to be a higher degree of responsibility or feeling of responsibility towards their own finances, as well as towards, you know, the environment and political involvement and things like that. So I find it extremely encouraging, actually, for the future of the nation and for the economy, even, that you've got a generation of much more motivated and responsible folks growing up, certainly than in my generation even. So I find it encouraging too. We talked about gifting money, Mark, and we've talked about loaning money, talked about acting as guarantor. What about actually going in on the mortgage and actually buying a house jointly? There's some clear implications there.
Yeah, just before that, there was one thing, just to finish the previous point, which I thought was interesting. So the kids did get the financial responsibility. The one thing that the kids didn't understand is, by the time they got to sort of 27, 28, 29, particularly if they boomeranged back to the family home, they liked living at home. You know, food was done, laundry was done, it was nice, the heating was paid for, all of that. Talking to the parents, there comes an age, which is normally 27, 28, 29, when the parents just want the kids to go. And when you explain to the kids that actually the parents now wanted them to go, and one of the reasons they were prepared to sacrifice part of their own finances was to get these kids out of the house, that generally came as a real shock to the kids. The kids didn't understand that there was this tension the other way. They thought that, you know, this was a hotel for life, and it definitely isn't. Parents want them to go. On buying jointly, the last lot of stamp duty changes introduced a significant disadvantage to that. So if you are buying what is effectively a second home, then there is a 3% stamp duty surcharge. And there are ways of doing it. So there's a product called Joint Mortgage Sole Occupier, where effectively the parents can share in the mortgage but not the ownership of the home, to avoid the stamp duty problem. So some parents do that, particularly if they want to retain an element of control. But again, these things have to be very clear and they have to be written down. And it was funny, we do joint mortgage sole proprietor mortgages, they're called JMSOs. One of the very first ones we did was with a son and a father. And the father, parents were living in South Africa, the son was in the UK. We did this JMSO mortgage. The very first mortgage payment was due and nothing was paid. So we got in touch with the son, whose mortgage it is, effectively, and said, look, you know, this isn't on, you've got to pay your mortgage. And he said, oh, it's nothing to do with me, it's my father's. So we got in touch with the father in South Africa and said, look, you know, no mortgage payment's been received. You really do need to pay this. And he said, it's nothing to do with me, it's my son's.
Oh, gosh.
Now, we got it sorted out, but it shows that, and I suspect they had both sort of slightly chosen to misunderstand the situation, that the son thought he now had a home and his father was paying the mortgage, and the father thought he was just doing the nice thing in order to make the mortgage affordable, but it was to his sons. So all of these things go to understanding it. But you can absolutely effectively have a joint mortgage, but you do need to deal with a stamp duty point.
Yeah, that's. I can imagine that's easily missed in everything else that goes around buying a house. That actually it's a second home if it's being bought jointly. But it's interesting to know that there's sort of legitimate ways around that. I didn't think it was possible historically to be on the mortgage and yet not actually an owner of the home. But clearly, I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, they're called JMSOs, and there are a number of providers who do JMSO. And interestingly, in all this family stuff, we've started to see it the other way. So we've seen a few examples where kids have helped parents who may be moving somewhere or something's happened in their life, where effectively the kid goes on the mortgage with their parent in order to help their parents. So you see families operating, down the generations as well as up the generations.
Is there anything we missed? We've sort of jumped around quite nicely, actually. But in terms of the legal implications of any of these things, we talked a little bit about getting a loan agreement in place and inheritance tax. Is there anything else we've missed on the sort of legal implications to parents of some of these arrangements?
It really is just a question of writing it all down. And sometimes people need to be separately advised. So, if your child is buying with a friend or, a boyfriend or girlfriend, then different people have different interests and you may need more than one lawyer involved. And people think that all sounds like a waste of money, but people have got different interests and people do need to be separately advised in these situations. And people just do need to talk about it. And look, you only have to do it once, and then once you've set something up, then that can last. That can last for a while. So it's just really important to do it right.
Yeah, I agree. Keeping lines of communication open, both in the run up to an event like this, I think is so important. Making sure that everybody understands where they are, and then actually codifying it into a proper legal document. Just so that there's no doubt. I think there's nothing worse for relationships than money getting in the way because of uncertainty or because of bitterness or anything like that. But keeping lines of communications open in the run-up and during any transaction like this is so important. And then, as you say, it's done. Mark, this has been useful, actually. A good sort of skip around this whole subject of the Bank of Mum and Dad. I've read the reports. There's two reports that you've produced, the legal implications and the financial implications. Where can people find those and more about what you've been up to?
So if you look at our Family Building Society website, we've got a series of guides to help people through all of the issues you talked about, which we've written in conjunction with lawyers, financial advisors, and other people who operate in this market. It's not that complicated, but you just need to do it right. So if you go to our website, there's lots of help and information to help people navigate through these various issues.
Great. I'll make sure that there's links to that on the show notes for this episode. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Some food for thought, I'm sure. If you've got any questions or comments for Mark, leave them at the show notes. I'll do my best to answer them. Maybe I'll put them to him if I can't answer them. meaningfulmoney.tv/session357. meaningfulmoney.tv/session357. My thanks again to Mark and the team at Family Building Society for their time and input. Okay, we got a review this week by Alex. Alex... This one makes me laugh. Alex's review is called Amazing. That's the headline. And then the review reads like this. Rob really knows his stuff and communicates it in a clear way. Thanks for all your effort, Rob. Well, thank you, Alex. I have no idea who Rob is, but that's okay. I appreciate you taking the time to leave the review. It's Pete. But anyway, if you like what you hear on the podcast, please do leave me a review. meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes, just like Alex did, or wherever you're listening to this show. Please do leave me a review if you can. It just helps others to hear about the show, keeps me near the top of the rankings. Nobody really knows how, the black box of rankings and all that sort of stuff works, but reviews are definitely a part of it. So thank you in advance for doing that. Okay, the competition to win a copy of Jim Collins' book, The Simple Path to Wealth, in my view, the best personal finance book ever written. That competition is now finished. Okay, that was last week. Fair to say last week's episode was one of the most popular ever. No great surprise there, Jim being an incredible draw. So the competition to win one of 10 copies of his book is now finished. So I'll be notifying the winners in the next couple of days. Thank you to everybody who's entered. Basically, the premise of the competition was to share about meaningful money on the various platforms, and you've been doing that with gusto. So I'm really grateful to you for doing that. Yeah, fair to say the response to Jim's interview has been incredible. Of all the videos on my YouTube channel, it's the most watched and most liked in the first 72 hours of publishing, which is one of the metrics that YouTube uses. Release day was last Wednesday, and that was also the single biggest download day Meaningful Money has ever had, at about 7,200. So just goes to show, right? He's more popular than I am, rightly so. So if you haven't listened yet, definitely do. It's a brilliant episode. Jim is a legend. Don't forget that the first phase of Meaningful Academy is now open to everybody. If you are looking to get started with your finances, then the Financial Foundations phase of Meaningful Academy is perfect for you. It covers everything from mindset and goal setting to setting and sticking to a budget, debt elimination, the basics of personal insurance and saving and investing. There's tons of stuff on there, lots of video lessons, worksheets, calculators, everything you need to start your personal financial journey on the right foot. So head over to meaningfulacademy.com for all the info you need. And don't forget, as a podcast listener, you get 25% off by using the coupon code podcast25. Okay, podcast25, all one word. Use that, and there's instructions on the sign-up page as to how to enter the coupon code. Okay? Right, next time, it's the last in-between episode before we get cracking on season 16. I'm going to be talking about the emergence and the dangers of buy now, pay later schemes with a lady called Rachel Duffy. She's the CEO of an outfit called PayPlans. Another really interesting interview, and I know you're going to enjoy it. Okay, well, that's about it for this session of the podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. My thanks again to Mark and the team at Family Building Society. Any questions or comments, leave them at the show notes, meaningfulmoney.tv/session357. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you next time.